Welcome to Cracking Cancer, where we tackle the tough questions about cancer with real patients and world experts. Our mission is to empower the cancer community through education, bring transparency to the oncology system, and drive funding for critical cancer research. Whether you're facing a diagnosis, supporting a loved one, or simply here to learn, we're here to bring clarity, hope, and action to the fight against cancer. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cracking Cancer. I am your host, Dr. Kyle Concannon, physician scientist now at the University of Colorado, studying lung cancer. And I am here today with Heidi Onda, and we're talking about how one can integrate into patient advocacy and how you can champion your own challenges and turn those into strengths, and how you can leverage the things that you've suffered from into positive change. Heidi, could you introduce yourself?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Dr. Concannon, for having me on today. And I am a lung cancer survivor for almost 7 years now and got into advocacy around the second year since my diagnosis. So it wasn't right away. It took a bit of time, but just sort of naturally rolled into a grassroots advocacy organization now where we can help people feel empowered to do something.
Yeah, and that advocacy organization that you really championed is called the White Ribbon Project.
Correct. And
Yeah, maybe you could speak a little bit to your story, what kicked that off?
yeah, so being a lifelong health enthusiast, health educator, and a fitness trainer, married to a primary care physician, my family and I were just totally shocked when I was diagnosed with stage 3A inoperable adenocarcinoma of the lung in October of 2018. And the really crazy thing about this was I didn't have any symptoms that were respiratory. I had an ovarian cyst that my doctor wanted to follow up with a CT scan. And the results showed that I had a 2.5 centimeter mass in my upper left lobe and some mediastinal lymph nodes that looked plump. I knew that didn't sound good. And my ovary was actually, looked like I had a normal ovarian cyst. And that just started a whole whirlwind of, next tests, PET scan, biopsy, no targetable mutation coming back. And I was basically given the news that I was terminal, that maybe 4 to 6 months was in my future. And it was a good idea for me to get my affairs in order. And what was really also shocking was I felt great. I felt like I was in the best health of my life. And so, number one, how could I have cancer? How could I have lung cancer? Because I didn't have a history of smoking, which was the only risk factor that I was educated about. And how could it be late stage? Because I felt good. And, my head was just spinning. Everybody's head in my family was spinning, and didn't even know what was really going around my outside world. We just sort of focused on what are going to be my treatment options. How long will I live? Will I be able to have some sort of quality of life and start to do some things off of my bucket list, primarily centering around my family. And didn't really think about advocacy or anything like that. I mean, I was just in survival mode at that point. As time went by, and I learned more about lung cancer, and I thought about, having been trained in prevention, and my husband being trained in prevention. How did we not know that lung cancer was the number one cancer killer? How did we not know it was the number one cancer killer of women and men, and so many facts, and didn't know any of the other modifiable risk factors? I felt really embarrassed. I know my husband, Pierre, felt embarrassed about that too. And I started to get kind of angry when I would look at websites where the institutional messaging comes from and see that it was just, the right information wasn't out there. The facts that anyone could get lung cancer was not out there. And what were we going to do about it? But it was staying very quiet at that point. It wasn't talking about my story outside of my own family. And I happened to meet by chance a young woman who was the same age as my son, who was living with stage 4 lung cancer with the ALK positive mutation, and got together with her a couple of times and saw that she was putting herself out there, getting a little bit of media attention. And I started to feel like, our story is a little unique. Two people trained in prevention, not educated about this. Why should I expect the rest of the world to know about this if I continue to stay quiet? And we just felt it was the right thing to do to start to come forward. But there was no forum, really. You could tell your story to friends and family and so forth, but it wasn't mass, hitting the mass population. So I was just kind of sitting on that for a while.
Yeah, and remind me what year it was when you were originally diagnosed.
So it was October of 2018. And then, so I had chemo radiation, a cisplatin, pemetrexed for 3 cycles. And then I was told by my oncologist that there was actually a lot of hope, because even though I didn't have a targetable mutation, there was a new immunotherapy called durvalumab that had recently been FDA approved prior to my diagnosis, and that if I didn't progress with my chemo radiation, that I would qualify for it. And that was given by infusion every other week for a year, a total of 26 infusions. So I started treatment, chemo radiation in November of 2018. Finished that the day after Christmas of 2018, and then started durvalumab in January of 2019. I had my last durvalumab infusion in January of 2020, and I have been, knock on wood, no evidence of disease since. So I'm almost 7 years out from diagnosis, and I am like 5.5 years out from my last cancer treatment. So there is hope. We need people to know that there's hope, and there is quality of life associated with that. But the pandemic hit, about 2 months after my last treatment. And I still really hadn't met, I certainly hadn't met anybody else on durvalumab. I hadn't met other people around my age or background. It was just the one young woman. And we were fortunate in terms of the pandemic that Longevity at the time started an online support group, or maybe they had it before, but I wasn't aware of it. And people were just Zooming in, and they were meeting patients from across the country. And everybody was kind of feeling like I was, like, what can we do? We're getting, not only are we marginalized in general, but when we hear about, triage for potential, COVID during that time, that people with lung cancer, at least in my state, weren't going to get triage because we were people who were perceived as those who didn't take care of themselves in the first place, or took, too many risks. And we're hearing this around the country, though. And I just kind of I said, why don't we all start approaching our cancer centers now about what they're going to do in November for Lung Cancer Awareness Month? And so everybody was, really gung ho. I'm going to write to my cancer center, and we're all doing this. And then we report back, the next weeks and months, pretty much the same story, either totally ignored or dismissed. Great ideas, and we'll get back to you. And then we never hear back. And before I knew it, it was now September of 2020, and I still had nothing. And I happened to see some, lots of evidence on social media about so many awareness efforts for other diseases and other cancers, and still zero for lung. And I just asked, after I Googled, what is the color? It's white. Would you light the building up white, like you're lighting up the, other colors for, those other diseases? And finally got back a response that I felt was so humiliating. The response was, there's white lights in our parking lot. We turn them on every night, and doctors wear white coats. And I did snap at that moment. And I went from being this very shy, introverted, private person to the person who's speaking with you now, that it was outrageous. I was so filled with anger and disappointment and humiliation that I screamed in the street in front of my house to my husband, please make me a big white ribbon out of wood that I could throw on the front door and at least tell my neighbors that I have lung cancer and I'm not ashamed of it and we need to talk about it. And people always say, why did you ask him to make it in wood? Well, actually, the first thing that went through my mind was, I'm just going to make a big poster and put it on the front door. And I thought the first wind's going to blow and take it off, or the first snow, it'll be destroyed. But Pierre took up woodworking when I got diagnosed as an outlet, and I knew he could work with it. And I also knew deep down that it would last longer than me. And my hope would be that this perpetual piece of work, a door hanger, would at least symbolize to me my hope that my husband would continue to advocate on some level after I was gone. And we put that up, and then one picture on social media went viral. And before we knew it, patients from all over the country were inboxing me on social media wanting them, and we were just mailing them to them. We were making them, sending them out, and they were putting their images with these ribbons on their public pages. And I thought, not one person in these photos looks ashamed to me. And maybe this was the missing piece, that there was no symbol. There was nothing for us to feel that belonged to us or a community that we belonged in, until this one burst of anger led to, this creation of this one ribbon, and people identified with it and wanted it. And if they were willing to start telling their stories, maybe we do have a formula to crack this stigma and move forward.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I was at your house on Saturday helping to make these and sign them, and the point you're making, that there needed to be some catalyst. You had this experience which was really frustrating to you. You weren't being heard. And then that gave you the activation energy to make this change. But you also identified a need. You identified that there's a missing symbol here, that, breast cancer is very well known for their symbol as one example, and no discredit to them. That's great. That's what, those are things that really, really work. But lung cancer was missing it. And it was really hard for people to rally around a common flag, so to speak, something that connects them all and they all identify with. And then the second you identified that, put it out there, and it was something else for everyone else to grab onto, and you had mentioned something that no one else who was showing their images with the white ribbon looked ashamed.
No.
I'm interested in, I want to talk more about the White Ribbon Project and the details and everything, but I am really curious about that stigma of shame with lung cancer, where that comes from. And you had mentioned when you were initially diagnosed, you were quiet for a while. Where did that come from? What was that feeling?
Yeah. So given my limited education about lung cancer, I knew that people were judging me. I had people in my own family that were, gosh, are you sure you didn't dabble in something in middle school or high school or whatever? And I was like, no, I was the most boring kid. And, all my friends went to the back of the bus and smoked cigarettes. And I sat in the front, just sort of intimidated by everybody and couldn't wait to get off the bus. And, but everybody was questioning me. And at first I used to be really defensive about it. And then as I learned more, like I said, in the beginning, you're just in survival mode, and then you're trying to answer questions of family and friends. You're not really out, like I am now. And thought, gosh, how disappointing that they're even asking me this. And then when I got to the point of, okay, Heidi, you're a health educator, you know that this is the education that's out there. And if you didn't know, why should they know? And why should anybody walking down the street know? And I should expect that question. And I shouldn't get mad at this person, because what happens is when you snap back, then that member of the population shuts down and they're like, whoa, she's pretty bitter, and walks away. But if you're like, that's what I thought too until I got diagnosed. And wow, look at all this information that I can share with you about other modifiable risk factors. Or guess what? We maybe just don't know what the etiology of this could actually be because there's not enough research to know. More and more people are getting diagnosed. And then because I did work in prevention, I became outraged about the lack of screening. Here is a screening tool that's been out since 2011. And when I was diagnosed, less than 6% of those who are eligible were getting screened. And
You
how
mean low dose lung CT?
low dose CT scans.
Yeah.
Why is that okay? And why aren't doctors referring? And so then that became a piece of Pierre's passion as a primary care doc. It's like, we can do better with this. And yeah, we have a lot on our plate. We've got 20 minutes to see a patient. Shared decision making takes in itself that. And you don't have time, to do everything. And we need to figure this out. And so it was just along the whole spectrum of lung cancer from, in my mind as a health educator, we've defined prevention and all other cancers as screening and early detection. But in lung, it's been defined as don't smoke and this doesn't happen to you.
Yeah.
And we haven't thought, not that we haven't thought of, we're just not acting strongly enough about it's early detection, it's screening. Yes, smoking is, bad for your health in general. It increases your risk of heart disease and other cancers. But institutional messaging took this and focused solely on lung cancer for the longest time and blamed the victim, people who are addicted. As a health educator, I know it's behavior change really hard, and addictions it's even harder, right? So this is not something anyone should be blamed for. Everybody should be able to get screened if they're eligible at this point. And my other dream in the community is to have less polarization between people who didn't smoke and people who did. Yes, I am identifying as someone who never smoked because I think it's important that people understand you can get this disease. Anybody can get it. But I don't blame someone who has a smoking addiction, who has lung cancer or other respiratory diseases or, diabetes or heart disease. Everybody deserves compassion and, empathy and, to see how people are treated or made to feel when it's just hard enough to, deal with a cancer diagnosis and then have to balance this issue of shame. There's nothing to be ashamed about. Things happen. We don't know why, and when I saw people, this was the first ribbon. So this is what it looks like. It was just a handmade label. And on the back, Pierre you can see the kind of pencil marks, lung cancer awareness, turning into almost overnight, a movement. I thought the people are ready to be heard. They feel like I do, but maybe they're just not quite sure how to do it, as if I was. I mean, it just sort of came out one day. Like, I'm so angry, I want something on my front door.
Well, and there are a lot of misconceptions and a lot of stigmas that still are out there, and in one sense, I like the fact that the ribbon is white because we don't associate smoking associated, pollution or anything with a white, clean color, and it's true. What people don't often realize is that if you eliminated smoking entirely, lung cancer would still be a top 10 killer. It's not, that doesn't make lung cancer go away. It would be still in the top 10 comfortably. And people don't realize that because we've done such a good job associating smoking with lung cancer, which is good. Like that, that's obviously very true. And it is the most preventable risk factor for lung cancer. But to your point as well is there's this stigma when someone gets lung cancer, one, that you did this to yourself. You deserve this. I didn't smoke. I don't deserve this. And it's hard to do the comparative suffering. It's impossible to not. People do this all the time. But as someone who came from a family of heavy smokers, my parents smoked like it cured cancer. they didn't get lung cancer, but it was, growing up with in a family where people are frequently chain smoking, they also don't want to be doing that. You know, a lot of these are the family I came from was a low income family. They were stressed about everything, they struggled with money, and they're watching their limited resources go away to this addiction that they know is hurting them. I grew up, I had chronic ear infections because I was around tobacco smoke, and they know this, and it killed them. It really, really hurt them that they couldn't stop. And I think to associate another blame on top of that when someone gets lung cancer, I agree with you. It's blaming the victim. Like the one litmus test I have when I'm finding myself in a judgmental mode, which we can't always help, but it's would you trade places with them? If you would trade places with someone, sure, maybe you can have some judgment there. But most of the time when you're judging someone, I think you wouldn't want to trade places with them. And, keep that in mind that not everyone's walking, an easy path here. And a lot of times we're struggling through the same stuff together. And I think unifying all those things around the White Ribbon Project, because to my knowledge, this isn't unique different forms of lung cancer. This isn't if you got this, if you got that, if you have this risk factor, if you don't have this risk factor. Everyone with lung cancer has lung cancer. And this is something that unifies them all. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
That's my hope, was that this would become inclusive, because I never asked one person who inboxed me, like, what kind of lung cancer do you have? Do you have a smoking history? I was just like, what's your address? And I'm going to put this in the mail. And then they wanted to pay me. And then Pierre and I were like, we don't feel comfortable with that, because we don't want one penny to become a barrier to anybody who wants to talk about lung cancer. That was like a gift to us. So, we were just, using our own money for materials and shipping and so forth initially, until we could get the formal nonprofit status of a 501c3. And there was a fellow patient, Ann Phillips, from the University of Colorado, who actually lived about a quarter of a mile away from me, and her house backed up to my first house. And she was living with stage 4 EGFR lung cancer for about, I think, 6 years when I met her. And she was critical in helping us get that 501c3. She worked on that. And unfortunately, she passed away in September of 2022. We were having, like I said, things started moving fast, but what we've accomplished since is just, been amazing. And the growth and everything, from a grassroots movement, from one woman who got really angry one day. People should never underestimate the power of one voice. I never dreamt it would be mine, that I would just be quiet about this until, again, that outrage just, I hit my threshold.
So how did the designation of a 501c3, for those who don't know, that's the kind of federal designation of a non-for-profit. How did that change your model in any way?
Well, us paying for everything and shipping was not sustainable. And we knew that there was a lot of engagement now from stakeholders. I mean, industry, healthcare centers. I started approaching them with it. It's a very sad term. And I changed the word from patient to customers. I go, we're actually your number one customer if you get us screened, And then it's terrible. It was degrading to me, but I knew then I got heads to turn then at that point, and invited to Zoom calls with, cancer center directors and so forth. And it was like, well, how can we work with you? And then once we had that 501c3 status, we could accept donations. So if somebody said, I do want to pay for my ribbon, it's like, no, you don't have to. But if you want to donate, that's up to you. So some people were making donations. Some of our family and friends stepped up, who were not touched by lung cancer other than me, who, helped kickstart this. And then we were able, Pierre became, he learned how to write for grants. And so we were able to get grant money, and we're very specific. This is primarily for materials and shipping, because the more people we can touch, the better. And you used the word flag before, which is something Pierre has always used. It's like, this is like our flag. We didn't have it. I looked at it as the AIDS quilt. I worked in HIV/AIDS in Los Angeles in the early 90s, and there are a lot of things I'd like to touch on about that. But it was like, hey, look over here, and then you advocate for your piece. So if you're a physician scientist, maybe it's research funding, and it's also facts about lung cancer. For a patient, it's like, well, maybe I'm an immunotherapy patient and I want people to learn about that. Or if someone's a mutation, subset, then they're going to teach and educate about that. But it's just that first aha moment, like, hey, look over here. And we include everyone. And we especially want, more than anything, is people with smoking histories to feel comfortable coming out, showing that they are human beings who are valued. They have families that love them, and make this story important and human, because people with smoking histories are the majority of diagnoses. And if we're just standing up in fragments, good luck to us. But if we can get 235,000 people diagnosed every year to say, hey, I've got lung cancer, there's hope. There's hope even in a late stage diagnosis today. And because there's hope, don't you want to get screened? So that's my take home points here, to demystify screening and show that there is hope. I was diagnosed late stage. I'm not supposed to be sitting here talking to you right now, but I am. And my hope is that I keep, healthy enough till the next innovation, if and when I need something else. And for all my friends in the community, that's how we live scan to scan. I've learned how to live well scan to scan. I used to be miserable all the time. It was like I would get a scan and I'd have a good result. And then I would say, how do I know that tomorrow it's not going to start revving up? And then by the time 3 months is here, or now for me, 6 months, it's going to be a wildfire in there. And I don't do that anymore. It's like, if I have 3 months, man, I'm going to do the things that I want to do with the people I love the most. And I'm going to have fun. And yeah, scanxiety does hit me usually about a week before, but not all 90 days or, 180 days before. I'm not going to let this cancer ruin my life. I'm still here.
Yeah, I'm sure that took quite a bit of practice.
Oh, yeah. It took a lot of therapy too. Wonderful social workers help, shepherd you through these kind of negative mantras, I think, that we tend to, have in our heads. Reasonably so. It's scary. But how to get some new tools to enjoy our lives.
Do you think the White Ribbon Project was in some way a conduit for your anxiety, the uneasiness? Was this how you channeled those negative emotions into something positive?
I look at that kind of like when Pierre originally took up woodworking, because that's what, was like pounding on something and also creating something beautiful, and he was working full time when all this started, and he'd come home after a long day and catching up on notes and then work in the garage. It was like, could you teach me how to do it? And then when I started doing it, it was like, wow, that's exactly what I felt. It was like, wow, I've got all this energy. I'm a fitness trainer. I never stopped working. I train people, 4 days a week. And the other 3, I'm doing my thing on my own as well. And this gave me more, though. This was like, I'm so angry. It's like, why is it so hard to get a cancer center to want to celebrate survivorship? Their number one customer. Why is this so hard? But I could go and, go in my garage, saw these ribbons, paint them, put them in a nice package to people with a nice note. At the time, I did all these handwritten notes to make people feel that they were cared for, they were supported. And it did make me feel like I had purpose, especially during the pandemic, because we were just, we were prisoners of our homes initially. Yeah. And it made me feel like if Pierre was working on the front lines. This was like really a scary time for us. Okay. So, was he going to bring it home? Would I die during the pandemic? But maybe I would have helped spark something that others would then take those ribbons and either run with those or make a different permutation of it to keep this community visible and vocal, which is exactly what happened with HIV/AIDS. We had brave people who sometimes didn't survive very long. And I've heard that in lung cancer that, well, the reason why lung cancer movement hasn't, taken off before is because everybody died so quickly. And I thought, well, gosh, I was with people who maybe lived a couple months, if that, but their families were still engaged, the people left behind. And so we want caregivers and those who have lost loved ones to know they're included. We need them. We need healthy people to help carry on this good work. That's the recipe. It's the same that we had in breast cancer too. We've learned so much from these communities. And I just believe if we just keep growing the communities, which we're doing, because there's more and more people, it was wonderful to have you on Saturday. There were 2 women there who were newly diagnosed. I mean, one was last November. That's pretty new. But I delivered her a ribbon in November. She had reached out for one. So, and I brought that to her, and it was like, wow, she had a community within like a week of diagnosis.
Yeah. Different from when you were diagnosed,
Yeah,
thanks to your initiative, really.
that's exactly right. We just want to connect people to their resources. And, especially when one is found in Colorado. I mean, I usually drive out to that house and drop it off. But when I see this happening all over the country, I mean, it gives so much hope. And the young people, we had high school kids here, they're learning the narrative different than we learned it. They're learning, well, anyone with lungs could get lung cancer. So it's like, maybe we nib this, stigma away, 60, years into its making or whatever. And this whole new generation is learning, yeah, I mean, you could get lung cancer like you could get, breast cancer, or skin cancer, or whatever. You can just get it. And there's no that stigma and shame attached to it. It's more like, okay, let's get in survival mode and figure out where, my treatment is headed, getting those opinions instead of, just wanting to hide and not start working on how do I get through this.
But I think something that not everyone appreciates, especially when they're first entering this community, is just how much everything really does work together. I'm a physician scientist, which means I work largely in a laboratory, and then I treat patients, 1 day a week. And most of the grants I've applied for have been foundations, by the numbers. There are these big government grants and everything, but if you just go by the numbers, a lot of grants are from foundations that have, a 501c3 status, that have their mission. They rally around a common cause and then raise funding that we can use to create new therapies and achieve their mission. The physicians, the researchers rely on that because there's not a lot of funding in cancer research, or not as much as we need. So the ecosystem really does work together. Not only is the awareness that's being created helping the next generation of patients be diagnosed earlier, helping physicians, as they're in a busy clinic, oh, they have a cough, they're young. Oh, well, if you see it enough, it will trigger, maybe we will get the CT, So those things really do matter, but it also impacts on the other end when someone is diagnosed, the treatments that are going to be available. What are you going to do about it? And we really all do work together. I think people don't see how much that is, and that includes pharma, that includes the other groups that are heavily stigmatized. I'm curious your thoughts. You had mentioned now that you're a 501c3, you can get pharmaceutical donation. Did you have a negative sentiment around that? I'll mention transparently, our podcast is also in the process of getting charitable donations from pharma to help fund us. And the pharmaceutical companies I've worked with have been really that have really shared the mission, but there's a stigma there. I'm curious if you felt that too.
Yeah. So, I had my preconceived notions of pharma and so forth. But then when I started to learn about the federal funding, issues, and lung cancer has recently lost all of its Department of Defense through the CDMRP program, zero money goes to lung cancer. That, gosh, this particular pharmaceutical company saved my life. I mean, private industry is the one working on this right now. And gosh, they're happy to help us get ribbons across the world, basically. I mean, this was just amazing. They, had people come to I will thank transparently AstraZeneca. They came to my home and they, experienced what you did, and painted and did all these ribbons. And I watched them pack them in just normal suitcases. And that same day left back to their headquarters and then shipped them to 36 countries. And that's how things really were able to get going globally and how helpful that was. And and all these other pharmaceutical companies, who are working on, different targeted treatments or immunotherapies or whatever. These are the people who have our backs right now. And how can you not appreciate that work? And yes, I know there's so many other prongs to this and so forth, but they really helped, I think, this movement grow quickly. And we are very grateful for it. And, maybe my next, need is going to come from, it goes for biotech too. They've been very, very supportive. The places where people's tissue goes to get, next generation sequencing and so forth. This is the innovation right now. And when you're sitting here as a patient and you're, hearing things in the news about federal cuts and this, that, it's very frightening. It's very frightening. And to know that, well, there are still lots of efforts going on behind the scenes, gives some more hope. So that 501c3 status was very important for us to be able to sustain what we're doing. And again, we don't do active fundraisers at all. We do have people who are very excited about this and have the means to donate. We never ask. They do it on the website. When we do work with pharma and biotech, they're always very happy to pay for our supplies, and we pick our things up at the hardware store. And it's, it's been a positive relationship when we just are looking at awareness. Okay. So that's how we view it. And the more people who are out there telling their stories, waving that flag, my hope is that, because we know it exists, statistically it has to, but we also know that it does. There are some high profile celebrities out there who are dealing with this disease. And I did work with the HIV/AIDS community. And some people say, well, it's just not the same. I go, well, back then, those people were outed. There was no HIPAA back then. And people got outed. And then before we knew it, it was like, oh my gosh. But there was still this limited of, I guess, concern for this population because it was just one segment of the population. And then when it got in the blood supply, everybody cared and they wanted something done quickly. And then this became the number one infectious disease funded by the NIH. And we had Magic Johnson. Was that a magical moment? And I don't know him. I don't know what went through his head. But by the time that he had, this diagnosis, there were enough people out there to maybe make him feel, you know what, maybe my publicist might be saying one thing, no, don't say anything, but maybe I can help turn this around. And that's one of my great hopes, that more and more people come out. And then when that celebrity sees that, maybe they can look at this as, wow, you know what? I could do something really good. I could turn this around really, really quickly. And then, the masses know. The
Yeah,
masses.
and it is amazing, speaking to your experience when you had this catalytic moment, and then you mentioned that went viral, and it has. I mean, this has grown very, very big. Um, and that's all it takes sometimes when, you know, the conditions are right and a change needs to happen. So, and no one comes to mind for me in the lung cancer community who is a vocal and philanthropic, mission driven celebrity that, you know, other folks have had. Um, I think it's certainly a matter of time because lung cancer is so common. But yeah, we haven't really had that in the same way that HIV has.
Right. And I think it is out there. I think it is out there, but I think it's not enough stories that they're aware of. I mean, we've got to be in the news more, right? So we had a wonderful opportunity last Friday. That was just amazing. We want to, you know, like we were showing different cancer centers. Like, here's what this cancer center is doing. They're doing a survivor's breakfast in November.
Mhm.
Oh, then they're thinking because they're competitive. Maybe we should do that. Maybe we can start doing that with the news stations. You know, you develop a relationship, and that's where the healthcare systems can come in too. Because what else happened with HIV? We had the patients, the caregivers, the people left behind, but we also had the medical community literally lock arms with them, march in the streets saying, this is a problem. Anyone can get it. And we need the same thing here. And we do have that. It's happening. But sometimes we have some, you know, some hospital systems are more difficult than others. But what I found is when you start showing them what others are doing, then they have the, what is it, the FOMO moment, the fear of missing out.
Yeah.
We want to do that too. And we need to be able to activate advocates across the country to get to whether it be an NCI cancer center or a community cancer center. When you start doing things and people feel valued, that community grows. I mean, I've watched this happen in real time. It's been amazing and heartwarming and heartbreaking too. That why do we have to work so hard to make it happen? You know, why does it take so much? But what I tell people is, it's not fair, right? You know, you see these other cancers, but they started there too, and this is just where we are now in this moment in time, and it won't be this way forever.
Well, and the fundraising elements to these things can be challenging too. You know, right now, cracking cancer is getting established through CU for a 501(c)(3) designation. So we will have that. We're working on it now. It'll be up shortly. But initially, you know, I had been in touch with not-for-profit lawyers who I know who work at charitable organizations. And if there was any element of trying to raise money for cancer research through anything other than philanthropic donation, then they said don't do a 501(c)(3) because it's really, you could lose the designation if you make money through, you know, a let's say you sell mugs, I don't know, making something up.
Right.
But if you sell too many mugs, if you're too good at it, like there are all these risks and there's, you know, it's a burden to get the 501(c)(3) and keep it. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts for individuals who have their own mission that they're passionate about, but they're nervous about getting this designation. How do you do it? You know, what are the complications that come with it? Can you speak to those nuances at all?
A little bit. Again, Ann Phillips was integral in this. Her husband was a patent attorney, and he was able to find a, you know, colleague in his practice who took this on pro bono for us. But yeah, there's a lot of rules, and you know, and then if you do too much like legislative advocacy, you know, can you cross a line. And but one thing that's been true to my heart this whole time is we will never sell these ribbons. If I hear that someone is selling these ribbons, I want to know about it. There are people out there who, you know, I guess my cousin found something on Etsy that someone is selling like the same template, but
Huh.
not painted, and they're selling it for like $50. And I'm like, "Ugh," you know,
For lung
that's
cancer
no,
specifically?
just a wooden template, so it's looking like exactly like this.
Yeah.
And then they sell it, and they're trying to capitalize on something. So you could use it for any awareness, but you know, it just would be very disappointing to see someone take advantage of that in the lung cancer community, which is so underfunded right now.
Yeah.
Always has been, right? And now it's even more challenging. So we don't sell things. And I mean, there's now a question. We have this T-shirt and people saw it and they want it. I don't want to have the White Ribbon Project selling those. I would like to have like a pattern out there and tell people where they can buy it if they want. But it's just, you know, it's nothing that comes back to the White Ribbon Projects. Like, here's how to help us spread the word. Like wearing a pin, you know, this is not my company, you know, this is Pin Mart. And wow, they actually make one that says lung cancer on it now. Has nothing to do with our organization. But Pierre has learned how to write for grants. And when some grant money comes in, it generally is attached to a specific goal or goals, and you know that you have as measurable, and you have to, you know, go to those standards. And so you have to be accountable for all of that. And one which was very successful, and we hope to do more, was in Kansas. We were working with the University of Kansas, thanks to a phenomenal survivor advocate. She's having some health challenges now, though, but she got the fire started there, and got the University of Kansas connected with the Masonic Cancer Alliance, and then there was some pharma help for a build at a park. And we had like all the stakeholders there, right? Everybody who this was important to, like 100 people at this one event, which then became the catalyst for what could we do together for screening in the rural parts of Kansas. And then, you know, we were given some grant money. And so it was discussed, and it was like, let's get a couple of billboards up and let's do some physician education. And we can send you this data. I'd love for you to see it. You know, the screening rates tripled in like a year and a half. And it was a simple billboard. And it was the Lung Cancer Research Foundation who was so generous and had a graphic artist come up with the idea, you know, and so that helped with it. But then we've been able to now have data to show that, look, this collaboration, that's the key, right? The collaborative effort has really had an impact that's measurable. And can we start replicating that here in Colorado? You know, different barriers here. And, you know, and it's frustrating. So what works someplace, you know, is nuanced somewhere else. And it's all about relationship building and knowing who to talk to and communicate with and build that relationship. So there's just a lot of challenges, but what comes back to me every night, it's not just me. This community is worth it. I mean, we're worth it. We're worth that work.
Well, in chasing your mission, I love how you said, you know, collaboration is so important here. It's the heart of this. I think when it's hard when someone has their own vision or something that needs to be changed, to not look at some of these organizations and feel like there's competition. It's human nature to look at other people who are doing something similar to you and compare. And in my experience in this field, I would agree that everything is really collaborative around helping people who are suffering. And I think this is a situation in which rising tides raise all ships. You know, the synergy is the name of the game here. So for individuals who may be listening and have their own idea of something and it's tangentially similar to something else out there, I would encourage you to go investigate that. And the thing that it's tangentially similar to, go talk to those folks, you know, and if it is completely, you know, really aligned, maybe you join them. But if it is unique and something that would add, don't be intimidated by the fact that there are other people out there doing something similar. You know, rising tides really do raise all ships. This is something where the more we work together, you know, 2 + 2 is greater than 4. And we need more of the 2 + 2 + 2, you know. So we can do a lot together. And just because someone else is in the space doesn't mean you shouldn't be there too.
Yeah. And if you look at, and this is so cliche, but if you look at the spectrum of the unmet needs in lung cancer, it starts with screening and early prevention to, you know, research funding to, you know, survivorship now because we're living longer. And so we're having more health issues. Excuse me. it's like pushing an elephant up a hill. And with all that unmet need, that's not practical. And it's going to take a really long time, if ever, to be successful. But if we're all pushing together, we can get stuff done. And I look at all these different, whether it be advocacy organizations, pharma, biotech, NCI cancer centers, community cancer centers, primary care physicians.
Yeah.
What a great story to just kind of put down the competitive hatchets here and work together, because number one, for me, it's just the right thing to do. The number one cancer killer deserves more. It deserves more effort. No one deserves this disease. No one deserves any of these other ones, but those diseases have been able to organize and coalesce and work together. And then it does become competitive, but we've got a lot of good happening. We have people, in other cancers having a 95% 5-year survival rate. And here, when I was diagnosed at stage 3, I was told, 12% chance of making it 5 years. And I'm like, what? And now it's up to 27%. So that's still, not a great number, but we're headed in the right direction. And so we just can't stop. We have to keep going. I mean, we just, another obstacle comes. That's okay. Let's problem solve. Let's try to problem solve together instead of knock each other down, because in the end, everyone's going to benefit in the end. And I just don't know why it's so difficult. I've seen more now collaboration than ever before. So I'm really hopeful that we are going to go full steam ahead. We just can't say, oh gosh, we had this blow today, I give up. Maybe I need a break tomorrow to kind of process and try to figure things out. Maybe I want to get on a Zoom call with everyone, stakeholders. What can we do? We're just such a small part. We're that flag, but where do you want us to wave it? Where can we get some to you? And then do what they do best, whether it be with a ribbon or a pin or a t-shirt, to further the voice of people who have felt so invisible. It brings me back to kind of a tangent, like with the color white. I just Googled it the one day. It was like, okay, why? And after we were doing this for a while, someone came up to me who had been surviving for a long time and said, the color's not white. The color is clear. And I just kind of said, well, how do we market that?
It's hard to make a clear ribbon.
And then someone else said, well, no, it's actually pearl. And I said, do you want to make this difficult or easy for people? What if you're in rural America and you want to participate and you don't have pearl paint at your hardware store, even though, it's white. And guess what? It could be any color white from the store.
So I think we're getting hung up on the wrong details here.
Yeah, because what if it was a special color and then if someone's looking at it online, it's like, well, that's not really the color. It's a different shade.
Is that white 52 or white 54?
Yeah, it's white. It was a gift. So I thought this is actually a gift that the color's white. But my dream would be is that if I could just tie a white ribbon, in a knot and pin it on my shirt, it wouldn't have to say lung cancer anymore. People would know, okay, that person's, advocating for lung cancer. Just like if I put on a pink ribbon, it doesn't have to say anything on it. So we'll get there.
I think so. And, and I'm curious, leading to the ultimate goals, let's say all the objectives of the White Ribbon Project are achieved. What is the final product? Is it that everyone who is eligible for screening gets screened? Screening modalities change? What's the optimal goal?
I think the optimal goal is that this cancer is normalized. So people understand that I got cancer and I'm going to my doctor and my team, and there's always going to be people who are bigger self-advocates than others, but you can essentially trust that you're pretty much in good hands, maybe a second opinion. Whereas at times I have felt like I am earning a PhD right now, trying to understand, and that's not acceptable. It shouldn't be that way. And so to me, that's like the ultimate. You have, general widespread awareness that this cancer is normalized. We don't know how people got it. We just know we want to take care of them, and we want to support them so they have a good outcome. supporting positive outcomes, ultimate outcomes, optimal outcomes for all people affected by this disease. So that's, again, whether you smoked or not, doesn't matter. We should all have a good outcome. And then there's that ripple effect from those hopefully good outcomes to the families. I mean, this destroys families. I can't tell you, I usually make a list starting January 1 of all the people that I know who have now, passed away. And then you see kind of the unraveling on social media of what's happened to that family. I mean, these are real people. We are more than a data point on a graph. These are human stories, and we need to bring that to the masses. We can. It's been so successful in other, campaigns. And it just happened to start here in Greenwood Village, Colorado. But just with the ribbon, though, I mean, the advocates that me and people new to this disease standing on their shoulders, they did tremendous work. And this is for them too, and their families who are so, just harmed by this disease. And it's just so sad to think, because it's all come from a lot of inaccurate information. But was it inaccurate? Maybe this is what we knew then, and this is what we know now. So could institutional messaging please change too? And not open themselves up to, oh my gosh, we're now responsible for all these people not getting screened, and because we created a stigma and blah, blah, blah. How about, this is what we knew then. This is what we believe was the only risk factor. But now we know this, and anyone would, that's it. I hope I live to see today that loudly screamed is anyone with lungs can get lung cancer, or anyone can get lung cancer, whatever permutation of that gives the message that anyone can get this. And it's coming from the sources that people trust the most. So it's never going to be just a patient voice, because it has to be validated by the medical community. And then the medical community needs to know that their backs are had by the institutions that fund you, that give public health messaging, because that's what people listen to. I don't want to have to dig on a website to find that information. Most people don't have the patience for that.
Well, and I think with the speed and power of the movement, I think it's an inevitability that the community will get there. Really, I do. I'm curious, for individuals who have their own thing that's passionate to them, but they haven't been involved with advocacy, they, don't have a strong healthcare knowledge, but they're passionate and they are onto something real. They're onto a real problem that they're interested in improving or fixing. What would you say to that person to help motivate them to pursue their passion, to overcome their adversity and make positive change?
So the way I look at this, and so I'll speak to the White Ribbon Project, but I think it could be across any advocacy, is there is a spectrum of advocacy. So you can do what you can do. Look at your skill set. What do you like to do? And maybe there's something that can be applied. But know that not everyone's going to do what Pierre and I do and spend 80 to 100 hours a week working on this initiative, or other amazing advocates, who know a lot about the science, and that's intimidating. What if you can press a share button on a social media post that you think is important and get that to your network and encourage your network to do that? What if it's, making a white ribbon out of a ribbon that you get from the store, that you can buy in a, fabric store? What if it's talking to your community or your friends? This gets the word out. And then people start to start with where they're comfortable. And then some people will step outside of their comfort zone. I mean, I ended up jumping out of my comfort zone, right? But that's not what's expected from everybody. And that's very intimidating. And it does take over one's life. And we are desperately trying to work on a balance. And I don't want to see everybody struggle with that, to say, well, I don't think I want to get involved with advocacy because it's just going to take over my life. It doesn't have to. They have to be able to express their boundaries, know what they are. Maybe it's going to be, gosh, if the Cancer Center is going to do an event for, let's say, a breakfast or a lunch for survivorship, maybe you want to see, can you volunteer to help? Can you volunteer to get the word out to the community? The other thing that we're able to offer at the White Ribbon Project is every third Saturday of the month, we have a community Zoom call. And that's where a lot of this takes place. People get on the call. Some of them are brand new. Some of them are regulars. We always have a subject matter expert. We'd love to have you on if you'd love to come when it's a good time, and give people some hope. Talk about what's happening, in your research, or what's happening, maybe decipher some of the things that come out of ASCO for us and so forth. And then we have patient advocates and caregivers come on and share about things that they've done. And then we open it up, for Q&A, brainstorming, and that's how a lot of this has grown. We don't know everything. We want to tap into other people's creative, suggestions or their talents or things we've never even thought about. And I think that's what makes the White Ribbon Project different than one of the things that makes it different than the other advocacy organizations. A lot of patients have come to me and said, I love this organization and that, but the only way I feel that I'm of value and the only thing that I'm basically told, this is the advocacy opportunity is fundraising. And we don't do that. And we want those funds to go to those organizations, but I don't want to organize runs and this and that, and if someone's not comfortable fundraising, but they want to host a build and we can send them ribbons that are ready to paint, we will help them with that. Or if they want a little more, gosh, I am going to pay more attention to the posts of the White Ribbon Project because I want to share them. Or start conversations with their medical team. Ask their doctors to help them communicate with the people at the hospital because that's intimidating. Like, why don't we have a luncheon? This cancer center does it. Why don't we have one? And push your physician to try to find out who makes those decisions. And then they can draw us into the conversation and we back the patient up. And sometimes we can help with a little bit of funding too, to get coffee and bagels. Let's start with that.
Well, Heidi, that sounds great. And thanks for taking so much time today to talk about the White Ribbon Project, how individuals can get involved with their own advocacy, championing their own missions. What's the best way for people to learn more about the White Ribbon Project and get involved?
They can go to the website. So it's thewhiteribonproject.org. Or they could reach out to us if they have specific questions at info@thewhiteribonproject.org. And you're basically going to reach me and Pierre, and we will get back to you and attend our meetings. Those links are always on our website, and then I do publish them the Tuesday or Wednesday before the actual call. So I'll be publishing that probably tomorrow or the next day on all of our social media platforms. But again, it's always on the website, and they can also get on an email list. So they'll always get those as well. And talk to us, reach out. We're real. We want to be immersed in the community. We want to know what they're thinking. That's how the little ribbon was born, which you painted many of the other day. There were some people who love the idea. They're not ashamed to talk about it. But it's hard to walk around with this if you're traveling and hiking, and then they're tying the smaller one. There it is. Can't see it on this call, but
yeah, we see it in the back there.
You can see it in the back. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So the little one's next to the big one, and that's a lot more portable for people. And sometimes just have fun with it. I mean, when I fly, I have the ribbon, I get questions, and sometimes they let us do a PSA about screening on board. We always show them formal information. So it's not like, oh, it's just this kind of nutcase woman just, trying to save us. But here's literature, I'll point to End Lung Cancer Now out of Indiana University, because they have some great stuff, and it's very well written. And the flight attendant then hands it off to the pilot, and I guess they do their own little research, and then they go, yeah, let her do it. And we let people know about screening eligibility on flights. And they follow us off the plane, and they want us to help them find where they can get screened. So it's real-time action and results. So it works.
It's a grassroots movement if I've ever seen one. Yeah.
Super grassroots.
Heidi, thank you so much for coming on and talking about everything here. Folks, hopefully you've learned a lot about this process, and you can visit the White Ribbon Project. And I think that's it for our episode today. So we'll catch you all next time. And thank you again, Heidi.
Thank you. Thank you so much for helping us get the word out.
Absolutely. My pleasure. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Cracking Cancer. If you found this helpful, please like, subscribe, leave us a review, and visit crackingcancer.org for more information. Every dollar we earn goes directly to furthering the podcast and supporting vital cancer research. Because together, we can crack cancer.